Jonah lay on the beach, exhausted and unable to move. He lay with his face towards the sun. He never thought he would see it again. For 3 days he was trapped in the belly of an underwater beast. His garments still smelled of rotten fish, and his skin was scarred from soaking in stomach acid. Although Jonah was thankful to be alive, he was not excited for the journey ahead. There, as Jonah lay on the sand, feeling the water caress his bare feet, the Lord spoke to him again. "Rise up, Jonah. Go to Nineveh, the massive city inland, and tell them that judgment is coming if they do not turn from their wicked ways." Jonah was still filled with hatred for Nineveh, but he would not run from the will of God again. So he picked himself up and traveled towards Nineveh. He traveled for 3 days, huffing and puffing his way to the great city. Nineveh represented many great nations of Jonah's day. It was hundreds of miles long and had massive towers looming over the people below. Jonah entered the city's gates. Walking the streets, he could see traders bartering in the alleys. He saw soldiers roughing up thieves and women beckoning young men into their brothels. Jonah hated them. He could not fathom such a wicked and debased people turning from their ways. They would always be the same. They would never change. Jonah huffed his way through the city streets for an entire day, making his way towards the main part of the city. Jonah glared at everyone he saw. He would make his message brief and then leave to watch the city burn. "Nineveh has 40 days, and 40 days only. The city shall be overthrown," he yelled for all to hear. He yelled it for word to spread, and spread it did. Word immediately reached the king of Nineveh. What followed was beyond Jonah's comprehension. Jonah watched as the entire city began to weep. Those short words struck a collective chord in the heart of Nineveh. It was almost as if the words of God had been speaking to them for years, and now all they needed was a little push. Jonah was amazed as the culture of Nineveh switched in a matter of hours. People began to worship God and cover themselves in ash as a sign of mourning. People fasted and prayed to the Lord for forgiveness. Brothers who fought reconciled, and past wrongs were forgiven. The most powerful and the poorest of the city were repenting, and Jonah could hardly believe it. The king himself arose from his throne, removed his robe, and clothed himself in sackcloth as a sign of repentance. He stood in front of his city and said, "By my decree, let no man or animal eat or drink during this time, and let us cry out to the mighty God for forgiveness." Jonah watched among the crowd as the king spoke. The once wicked tyrant of Nineveh seemed to be broken and humble. He was a new man, preaching to his people a message of faith and humility. "Let us all turn from violence and hatred. Perhaps then God may relent and turn his anger away from us." The king's words filled God with joy and gladness. Yet they filled Jonah with rage and displeasure. Jonah's blood boiled, and he set his gaze towards a hill overlooking the city. He climbed in and sat on a rock with his arms crossed. There he waited to see if God would destroy the city. He did not. Jonah threw a stone towards the city in anger. He beat his chest and looked up to God. "Do you know why I fled from you on that boat to Tarshish?" Jonah asked accusingly. "Because I knew you are loving and patient and willing to forgive, and I did not want to see you spare such a wicked people." Jonah raged in front of God. "Is it right for you to have this anger?" God asked gently. A deep anger infected Jonah's heart. He tired himself out yelling at God, and then fell beside a tree. He rested his back against its trunk and looked up to see it produced wonderful shade to escape the heat. The tree provided covering and peace for Jonah's raging mind. He breathed in deeply and closed his eyes. In that moment, he loved that tree more than anything else on earth. He let his mind wander, dreaming over simpler times. The tree enveloped him in shade, shielding him from the scorching sun above. As Jonah rested in its arms, he fell into a deep and peaceful sleep. That night the Lord appointed a little servant to visit Jonah and the tree. A tiny worm was sent by God to gnaw at the tree's roots underground. It infected the tree and caused its leaves to wither and fall. The once beautiful tree crumbled into itself while Jonah was asleep. Morning came and Jonah was awakened by a scorching east wind. It blew hot air, churning up dust and leaves to choke Jonah's breath. Jonah stumbled to his feet and looked up at the tree. His beautiful safe haven was destroyed. The sun beat down on Jonah's head and his neck began to burn. The hot wind made his lips crack, and the sun was growing more and more hot. Jonah yelled to the sky and fell to his knees. He beat his fists on the dusty earth and wept. "It would be better for me to just die," Jonah screamed. The sun was still beating down on Jonah, and he missed the tree's shade by the second. "Are you justified in your anger about the plant?" God asked Jonah. Jonah glared up at God. "Yes," he screeched. Jonah's eyes were deep red and his brow furrowed as he spoke. "I am angry enough to desire death." God replied to Jonah, this time with more force behind his words. "You pity this plant for which you did not plant. You did not help it grow. You did not water it or care for it, yet you loved it and wanted it to live. Should I not care more for Nineveh? It is not a plant, but a city with more than 120,000 people who do not know what is right or wrong. Shouldn't I care more for them than your precious tree?"